Hello everyone, this is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore. I'd like to welcome you to this week's episode of the MuseScore Café. So this is Wednesday, May 11th. I'm trying to get back in the habit of announcing the date, although it's always there in YouTube also. This week is kind of special, and so I'm going to be talking some general things about what's special for me this week and for all of us this week. So this is the 4th anniversary of the launching of Mastering MuseScore. The original website that I created is 4 years old this week, and the community that I created is 1 year old this week. So a couple of anniversaries to celebrate. And I've pinned up to the top of the chat a link to the Mastering MuseScore course, which is on sale along with all my other courses. And so I have it listed there with the coupon code already there. So by all means, if you are not already enrolled in Mastering MuseScore online course, click that link to get the special anniversary discount. All right. So, yes, thanks for the kind words here. And the whole idea of this being an anniversary week, there's a lot of reflection that I'm undergoing, thinking about what's going on, what's where I've been, where I'm going to, etc. And there's a lot of things happening as far as MuseScore 4. You've all heard me talk about, it's coming soon-ish, not weeks or years, but months away is what I would say. But how many months, we don't know. 2, 6, who knows? But anyhow, so I'm going to have, new stuff coming with that. But I also have, when I opened the community, I had some ideas of how things would go, and it's kind of organically grown over time. We've moved the music masterclass into the live stream feature there. They're about to open a new chat feature within the community, within Circle that hosts that. And I've also been thinking in terms of, more music courses. I've got my basic music theory, my harmony, my counterpoint courses, but I'm going to add more music courses and try to create something that resembles like a formal degree kind of program that I'm tentatively calling the Alt DMA, DMA being Doctor of Musical Arts. And so I'm tentatively looking at creating this program I'm going to call the Alt DMA. Anyhow, lots of stuff going on. And I want to actually plant an idea in all of your heads to be thinking about and maybe give me feedback on in the community. And it has to do with branding. So Mastering MuseScore is the name of the book that I wrote many years ago. I guess it came out 7 years ago. And then it became, then the name of my website. But now that I also offer all these other musical courses, I'm really wanting to have a more general brand that encompasses Mastering MuseScore within it. Kind of like if you think about any company that runs different brands. Think of that however you might want to think of it. I should have a better example in my mind. Apple has the iPhone brand, right? And the iPad brand and the Mac brand. These are all, Apple is the brand, but those are product lines within it. So Mastering MuseScore is going to continue to be what it is, but I'm looking for a bigger picture thing so that the Mastering MuseScore and Alt DMA and other music courses could kind of coexist. So this has been occupying my thought a lot lately, and I'll be asking some specific questions in the community to try to get some discussion going. But that's something I wanted to bring up while I've got you all here. Anyhow, let's get on to talking about the actual subject of the day, which is tips. I want to, sort of celebrate the fact that we've been doing these cafes for the last when was the first cafe? I should have checked the date on that. I don't remember when I actually launched the cafe, but I'm going to look that up in a minute. But I've been learning from you while I do this, and also learning from my answering questions in forums, and sometimes I learn things along the way that I didn't know already. And so I'm going to share some things that I have learned from you all, and some of the things that you all are sharing. So if you have any of your favorite tips you haven't already posted to the community, now's a great time to post them in the chat, and then I'll be really happy to talk about them. So I am going to put the thread that I created into the chat here. So if anyone wants to check this, a couple people have posted some things, and Dave has gone way above and beyond as usual and posted a huge list of tips, and I'm just going to kind of run through as many of these as I can. And I see that Dan has also put in some comments about folders and files, and so I'm going to address that, and also just your comment about trying to search when you don't know the name to look for. I want to talk about that, and how we can do a better job there, because that's something we're actually thinking about for the documentation in MuseScore 4, how to create a form of documentation that doesn't require you to already know what you're looking for. And we've experimented with those ideas over the years, and we'll just keep trying. So I'm going to run through some of the things. So some of the things in Dave's list are really straightforward things that I can just demonstrate. Some of them maybe work better as descriptions here in the community, so I definitely recommend you look at these things. But some of them are really just wonderfully specific things that I can talk about. So one of the things, the first one is about multiple voices. And yes, I would say if there's one thing that has caused the most confusion among the most people in learning to use MuseScore, multiple voices is probably the one. It is probably the most frequently asked question on the forums as well as on Reddit. For whatever reason, maybe not so much on Facebook. Not so sure about that. But questions for which the answer basically is use multiple voices. So if you don't already know about using multiple voices, I'm just going to do a quick demo, but there's so much to really get inside about how this works. The basic idea is you go into Node input mode, and I also want to turn on my lovely key logger thing. So you go into node input mode, and you want there to be some notes with stem up and some notes with stem down, because they're indicating independent rhythms, like a soprano and an alto part in a choral arrangement, or your piano music in which some fingers are sustaining notes while other fingers are moving. So you enter the stem up notes in voice 1. So I'll do that. And then I'm going to go back. I'm going to hit Control left arrow to go back to the beginning there. And now I'm going to enter voice 2. And the voice 2 button here on the toolbar. And notice I've never left node input mode. I press the voice 2 button, and now my cursor has changed to green. And now I can enter my voice 2 notes, and it could be different rhythms, right? So I can enter half notes. And that's not the octave I want that in, so I move it down with Control down, and then G, and then back to E maybe, right? So I can enter different rhythms at a time using multiple voices. It's incredibly powerful feature, but learning to get comfortable with how it works takes some time. So the biggest tip that I can give you about it is remember that these buttons on the toolbar work exactly like all the other toolbar buttons, which is to say, when you're in note input mode, they set the stage for the next note you enter. If I press voice 1 button now, it's not going to change anything I already entered. When I press the voice 1 button, all it does is change the cursor to blue and moves it back to a more reasonable place. But if I press a button while I'm in node input mode, all it does is set the stage for the next note I enter. So if I now type an E, I get an E in voice 1. Whereas if you're not in node input mode and you have something selected, when you press a voice button, it's going to actually change that note if possible. So if, like this E here, if I press the voice 2 button right now, it will actually move it to voice 2. So pressing these buttons while you're not in note input mode changes whatever notes are selected, if possible. Like if I try to select this D and move it to voice 2, it's going to be a no-go because this D can't go to voice 2 because the E is already kind of blocking it. Only if there's another note or rest already on that beat ready to receive that note can you move it to another voice. Anyhow, getting used to how voices work and that the fact that the buttons work differently, as do all the buttons, duration as well as accidental buttons, all the buttons work to set the stage if you're in note input mode, or to modify what you've selected if you're not in note input mode. That's my biggest tip about using multiple voices. All right. So May, so I knew it was May. When I launched the website was early May, mid-May. It was basically, it was 4 years ago this week. So thanks, Dan, for looking that up. And yes, it was 4 years ago this month that the Cafe series started, a couple of weeks after I launched the website. So there you go. It's all part of the anniversary celebration here. All right. So multiple voices definitely form an important thing to know about in using MuseScore. But I'm going to run over to Dave's list and try to find some other ones here that I can easily pick off as specific tips that I can give. So he's advising to try different instrument combinations, which is a great idea. If you write a piece that you don't need it to be, like if you're writing a piece that you're writing for a specific ensemble, well, then you already know your instrumentation. But if you're just writing music, be open to different instrumentation. Absolutely. So here's a really good tip that he has, number 3. When you are adding an instrument, I pressed I to bring up the instrument dialog. If I want to add a brass instrument and I open up the brass thing, I only see these 5 brass instruments here because these are the common brass instruments. But these are by no means the only instruments that MuseScore has a sense of. So if I change from common to all instruments, now you'll see, there's all these different horns, as well as sax horns and baritone horns, piccolo trumpets in all sorts of different keys, Baroque trumpets, bugles.
Sorry, could you say that again? My apologies. I couldn't hear what you said.
And for some reason, Siri thinks I'm talking to her, but I assure you I am not. Does remind me, though, that I want to make sure I have the chat visible on my phone. So give me one moment to bring that up. There we go. Okay, so just switching to all instruments gives you access to all these other instruments and cornets and all sorts of sackbuts. All sorts of things that are not on the common instruments list. So now I can add a sousaphone or a didgeridoo. Now, not all of these actually have sounds defined for them. If I add a sousaphone, I'm really just going to get a tuba sound. If I add a didgeridoo, I have no idea what I'm going to get. A trombone, apparently. So this says didgeridoo is not part of the general MIDI standard. So you would have to download a sound font specifically for didgeridoo. So that's something you'd have to do separately. But in any case, all those instruments are there, so you can at least add them to your score, and it knows the right clef to use, the right transposition to use, etc. Also, I use the all instruments pull down, but actually I rarely do that. If I want a particular unusual instrument, I usually just search for it. Like if I'm looking for an alto flute, I might just type flute in here. And when I type flute into the search box, I get all the different flutes. So there's my alto flute. And now I can have an alto flute in my score. So I tend to use that rather than drop down. But those are the 2 ways to get to all the other instruments that you don't otherwise have. Alto flute is a transposing instrument, and that's why we see it was added with 1 flat to the key signature. So definitely a great tip to know how to access all the other instruments. And yeah, Dave, your comment about just changing sounds just to hear some different sounds is a good one too. And so also, as far as the playback goes, if you use the mixer, and if you've never used the mixer, View Mixer, or the shortcut F10, has all these different controls. The bottom section lets you change the relative volume of each instrument. The top section lets you control various different other settings, like which sound gets used for the piano. We have different piano sounds, right? Grand piano, mellow grand piano, bright grand piano, electric grand piano, honky-tonk piano, etc. And so it's where you can change different sounds for each instrument. So yeah, there's all sorts of things to learn about with the mixer. And as always, if you go to my online course, whole demonstrations on each thing. So rather than teach you all the details of everything that comes up, I want to point you to the information and share like the most valuable tip. The most valuable tip that I can share with you about the mixer has to do with channels. And in particular, if I add a violin to my score, then when I open the mixer now, we're going to see the violin, the arrow at the top of the violin channel is enabled. It's disabled for everything else, but violin has it enabled because if I click it, now we're going to see there's multiple sub-channels here. There's the standard arco sound, but there's also a pizzicato sound and a tremolo sound. So you can control the volume of those independently. A lot about how the mixer works is actually changing with MuseScore 4, so I hesitate to get you too dependent on the specifics of how it works now, because it's about to be changing. But in any case, knowing that that little arrow at the top of the channel strip will expand it and give you access to some of the additional sounds available for that instrument, that's something in MuseScore 3, anyhow, you're going to want to know about. In MuseScore 4, it's going to work differently. But knowing that that arrow gives you access to additional sounds is good. And apropos to something else that Dave talks about is chord symbols. If I do add some chord symbols to my score, like a C, the playback of these chord symbols, there's all sorts of controls we give you over that, some of which are there in the mixer. So if I press F10 to open the mixer, and I now go back to that piano staff, the piano staff now has that arrow enabled. It didn't before, but now it does. It does because when I added the chord symbol, it added a new channel just for the chord symbol. So if I click that arrow, it will expand it. And now I can see the normal channel as well as what's called the harmony channel, which harmony is the internal name for chord symbols. It should not have been called harmony. It should have been called chord symbols, but whatever. It didn't. That's something that I think we have fixed eventually. So here you can change the sound by selecting the harmony channel. You can now change the sound that's used for chord symbols. So, you could have your chords played not by a piano, but by a clavinet. And now, there you go. So let me delete that didgeridoo and add some notes here. So we'll hear the piano play the C, but the clavinet played the chord. The note was played by the piano, the chord symbol by the clavinet. So that arrow at the top of the mixer is a great thing to know about. If you're listening with headphones, especially, the panning controls can be useful in the mixer. If you're just using your computer speaker, you probably won't notice a huge difference, but or maybe you will. Depends on your setup. But if you've got external computer speakers that are spaced a little further apart than the ones built into your computer, then you might well notice things from panning. So by all means, the fact that the mixer allows you to pan the different instruments left and right can be a useful thing. On the subject of playback, since we're talking about the mixer, we're talking about something with playback, I want to talk about one of the things that I learned from you all. I learned from Johan Yete, I think, in the forum, and it's such an amazing tip. I can't believe I went 10 years of using MuseScore without knowing this. And it's how to get what we might refer to as scrubbing playback. And the way that this is going to happen is I'm just going to take the tempo and crank it all the way down to the minimum. Unfortunately, the minimum is only 10%. Even if I try to make it less than that, it won't go below 10%. But you can get the idea from this. If I press the play button now, it's super slow, right? Super slow. But if I now use the arrow keys, I can, and now go backwards. Right? That's an amazing, amazing tip, that by setting the tempo to be arbitrarily slow, now the arrow keys move you through the score left and right while you're playing back, and you can hear your score play back. Notice that was actually playing back all the instruments, because of course the notes play while you use the arrow keys if you're, just in normal mode. But while you're playing back, it'll play back all the notes. Right? It's playing the piano and the sousaphone. So yeah, that was just an amazing tip that I only learned a few months ago after years of using MuseScore. So the thing is, if people aren't listening through headphones, they're not going to be able to hear the pan controls. So I can do it, but it's not going to be very useful. So I'll go and do this. But if those of you who are listening with headphones will hear the difference, those of you who aren't won't. But I'll go ahead and do it just so you can hear what Dave is talking about, just so some of you can hear. So I've put some flute notes in. I put some piano notes. I'm going to go to the mixer, and I'm going to pan the flute left by dragging. So this works by, it's like a weird kind of control that you drag up and down. I find it a little awkward. You might find it easier just to use the slider at the top side. So pan it left, pan it right, pan it left, pan it right. So I'll put the flute on the left channel and the piano on the right channel. Now when I press play, if you are listening through headphones or have your speakers sufficiently far apart, you'll actually hear the flute on the left and the piano on the right. So, and yeah, there can be situations in which that can be useful. Most of these controls work if you double click them, it resets them. This one apparently doesn't, but how about if I re-click? Yeah, if I double click the part on the bottom, the bottom half of the mixer, it does reset. So that's useful. All right. So going more through Dave's list of other things here, copy and paste absolutely is super useful. So I think probably most people have used copy and paste, but if you haven't, select a measure or select a whole series of measures, like click one measure, shift click another. That's the standard shortcut in all programs to select a range of things. So I selected those three measures, Control C to copy, and now I can come over here to another spot in the score and Control V to paste and copy and paste. Beautiful tool. Absolutely. Now, Dave has a suggestion about creating a folder for each piece, and that works for his workflow. And it's not a bad workflow to create multiple versions of your piece. And I tend to not do this, but I probably should. Dave creates multiple versions of each piece and puts a number on them so that every once in a while, when he saves a piece, say, oh, I want to keep that version, but now I'm going to keep working on it and kind of want to keep that version that I already have. And so he'll do a save as, right? So if I already have a version of the cafe that I like, but now I want to start playing around with it, then I go to Alt F to go to the file menu and then save as and give it a new name and he does that by adding a number after it. So that's absolutely, if you like to keep multiple versions of a file around, that's a good way to do it. It is definitely a good way to do it. And speaking of files, I also want to mention that Dan had talked about the specific cafe episode I did on files and folders. And I'm not totally sure. I mean, I'm not remembering for sure what I talked about in that, but let me just mention a couple of things. People often have questions about where their scores are. Because if you're accustomed to using mobile apps, you don't think about that, right? Most apps have, each app has its own internal storage area, and if you're doing things online in Google Docs, it creates its own storage area or whatever. If you're not used to using traditional computer programs, then traditional computer concepts like files and folders might not be things that you're super comfortable with, but just know that that is what MuseScore is doing. It is using the absolutely traditional file and folder thing. So if you go to the File menu and now go to Open, you'll see that there's it's displaying you the files in the most recent folder that you've been working in, which in my case is my Cafe folder. But then, and your file dialog looks different. Everyone's file dialog, Mac looks different than Windows, looks different from Linux, and each flavor of Linux looks different. But this version of the dialog has an up button that will go up from the Cafe folder to the Mastering MuseScore folder. And then if I go up from there, it goes to my scores folder. So you can create folders and save things, and that's all related to what Dave's talking about. Dave's talking about creating a folder for each score. And maybe you would want to organize them by project, like have a file, a folder for choral scores, and then underneath that one for each choral score. But if you're working like Dave does, where you're often changing the instruments, maybe that doesn't make sense. Maybe it doesn't make sense to have because you might not know it's going to be a choral score until you're done with it. Really kind of depends on your own working method. But knowing about how files and folders work is definitely useful in using MuseScore. And knowing also that the scores folder is where your scores go. But if I go up another level, you'll see there's also the templates folder. And if you save things in the templates folder, then these are available every time you create a new score. So by saving something to your templates, like in my case, MuseScore Café, I've already saved this score, a copy of that score there, but let me just save another copy here. Now that I've saved to the template, the templates folder, when I go Control N to create a new score and then say next, under custom templates, you'll see MuseScore Café is there as a template because I saved it to my templates folder. And now when I create a new score, I get a new score set up the same type of setup, the same style settings, same instrument settings, and so forth. So the templates folder is a good one to know about. Also, when I was going, let me just open that folder again. If I go up to the MuseScore 3 level again, you'll see there's also styles, where if you save a style file, they go there. Sound fonts go here. Plugins go there. I don't remember if images was something I created or not, because I don't remember that being a standard folder, but whatever, there it is. Extensions is one if you've installed any extensions, the MDL, the MuseScore Drumline extension. There's a separate folder that gets created for those also. So knowing how MuseScore organizes things on your system is definitely a useful thing to know. All right. So there you go. So running through some of Dave's list a little bit more here. Using export. Yeah, so people often don't know how to create a PDF file, and that's actually a common question. How do I create a PDF from my score? And you do that by saying File, Export. So here you can export a PDF file, and that's the default because that's the file format that most people most often are interested in creating. But if you have a reason to create an audio file or a MIDI file, you can do that also. So you can create an MP3 or a WAV file. FLAC and OGG are OGG, I guess you pronounce it, maybe, are both audio files that are big in the open source world. One of them's not compressed. That basically one of them is like MP3 compressed, and the other is like WAV, not compressed. And then there's MIDI, which is its own thing and useful if you're creating a file that you want to then import into a digital audio workstation or a sequencer. There's Music XML, which is a useful format if you want to open a score in another notation program. And also, the audio formats are useful if you just want to send someone a score to listen to. You don't want to, they don't have MuseScore, so you don't want to just send them the MuseScore file, or maybe you don't want them to be able to access the notation, but you want them to hear the music. Then you can export to MP3 or WAV or any of those. MP3 and WAV would be the formats that I would recommend because everyone knows what they are, or at least every computer knows what they are, and people are used to seeing them, especially MP3. WAV is the higher quality, larger format. FLAC and OGG are like ones that Linux people know, software people know, but are probably not going to. They won't be useful to like upload to a website because web browsers generally don't know about them. But MP3 and WAV are good audio file formats for a lot of purposes. So that export dialog is a good one to know about. Oh, and a tip that I'll share about that export dialog, let me go back there. That export dialog, notice it now allows you to select what to export. Like if you don't want to export the score, you just want audio files of the individual parts, then select MP3 and maybe select all in here and then don't select the score. And now you'll get audio files of each part. When I hit the export button, it will prompt me for a name, but whatever name I give it, if I call it, MuseScore Café, it'll then create files, MuseScore Café Trumpet, MuseScore Café Alto Sax, MuseScore Café Trombone. It'll create separate files for each of those each of the instruments in your score that you selected in that dialog. So this is a relatively new thing. I think we added this set of controls around MuseScore 3.5, sometime within the last year or two, is when all of those controls got added. Before that, it was possible. It was just more convoluted. Yeah, the color change, you just noticed that. I noticed it too. And to be honest, I don't know what I did. Somehow I must have hit a shortcut that when I had a track selected, it turned red here. And to be honest, I don't know what it did. It's a feature that's there in case you find it useful. I've never found it useful, but maybe it would, if you've got like a large score, I could see doing things like making, like say an orchestra score. I could see coloring your woodwinds one color, and then coloring your brass another color, and your percussion another color, your strings another color, so that while you're scrolling. Oh, by the way, I'm scrolling sideways here. I'm going to bring that up in a second here. I'm doing that because on my touchpad here, all I got to do is swipe horizontally. I want to come back and talk about scrolling in a minute. But yeah, so in my case here, maybe I would select, I don't think you can select multiple channels at a time, so I'd have to do this one at a time. But there's that color. And so now my horns are orange while the rhythm section is blue. So that's something that you could do to make it a little bit easier to see which channels are which in the mixer. So I'm just selecting a channel and then coloring it. Maybe I'll color the guitar green because it's partially a melodic instrument and partially a rhythm section instrument, at least how I tend to write for it. So I'm coloring it something else. So that's what the colors are about. They're just there for you to play with and do whatever you want with. When I mentioned the scrolling, though, this is another one of those tips that I learned, quite a while ago, but after I had been using MuseScore for really a long time, an embarrassingly long amount of time, years. I think I've been using it for at least a couple of years. I had already been using MuseScore before I learned how to scroll. So the thing is, most people using MuseScore, when they first get it, you have this question, okay, here I've got this empty score here. Let me just undo all my changes. This is what you see, right? When you first open MuseScore, you see something like this. Well, what if you want to then, see other stuff? What you eventually realize is you can click and drag to get around that score. But if I try to do it in a score I've already written, click and drag, oh my God, this would take forever to get back to the beginning of the score, right? It would take forever. And you run the risk of accidentally dragging something. I clicked in the wrong spot and I dragged an accent mark. It's really easy to accidentally drag things in your score when you're really just trying to move around. Click and drag is not a good way of moving around. So the things that I did know about is the page commands. So all computers that I know of have keys labeled page up and page down, or shortcuts that do the same thing. So most Windows desktop computers have physical keys labeled page up, page down, home, and end. But most laptops don't, and most Macs don't. Most Chromebooks don't. So instead of physical keys, you need to know the shortcuts, and those I learned early on because they work the same in all programs, and so I just use them without even thinking. Page up is usually I have a key labeled FN, or on a Chromebook, it's called the everything key. It's the special key. It's not Shift, it's not Control, it's not Alt. It's just a special modifier key called the everything key. And I press that plus up arrow, and it does a page up. And you'll see it even reports as page up. And page up moves the score up and down. Now, it does this kind of just literally moving the page up and down. But then control page up actually, control page up, hello. Control page up, I guess I had clicked somewhere weird. I think I still had the accent mark selected or something. Control page up will move you, and control page down a page at a time, right? I'm going up to page 4. Let me zoom out so you can see that that's where I'm at. Page 7, and then control page up. It's page 6, page 5, page 4, page 3, etc. Right? So the page up, page down keys work normally, as does home and end. That move you to the beginning and end of a page or a score, depending on how things are set up. And so those keys work. Those are my usual ways of getting around a lot, but also the scroll wheel. And I knew that you could scroll up and down, like on a touchpad. On every touchpad I've ever used, 2-finger swipe up and down is a scroll, right? So you can scroll up and down, but on a lot of touchpads, you can't scroll sideways. On mine, you can. I can, on this computer, I can scroll sideways also. 2 fingers swiping sideways. But a lot of touchpads don't have that feature. On touchpads that don't have that feature, Shift plus 2-finger swipe will scroll sideways. And I've never met a touchpad that doesn't have that feature. So as a tip, I don't remember when I learned that, but I learned it, and it works not just in MuseScore. That's just a shortcut. Any program that does horizontal scrolling, 2-finger swipe with Shift enables it. But I didn't know that. I went many years of using a computer, and at least a year or two of using MuseScore before someone explained to me that, oh yeah, you can scroll sideways with the touchpad. Just hold Shift while you do your swipe. Or if you have a physical scroll wheel on your mouse, same thing. Shift while physically scrolling the wheel, or whatever other kind of device you have. That works on pretty much all devices also. Okay, so Dave's asking if the channel strips can be reordered. No, they're in the same order as the instruments in your score. So if you reorder the instruments in your score, they will be reordered in the mixer as well. I don't think there's any way to connect them. Frank is asking if the colors get transported with the MIDI. I don't think MIDI has a color, does it? Does it? I didn't think that. I didn't think that MIDI had any concept of colors, but if it does, then I don't know. It's something you could try and find out. So, so there you go. So there you go. I'm just checking to see if there's anything else in particular in the chat that I should respond to. But thanks. I'm happy to see people asking questions and answering each other's questions. So another thing that Dave mentions in his list here, and I'm probably not even going to get to everything, but I'm going to try to do what I can. Save selection. Yeah, if you're working on a project that involves creating a score, and you're kind of playing around with ideas, and you think, oh, this little section of this piece might be useful, then you can save just that selection. Like if you want to select just these 4 measures of the piano part to then do something else with, you can go to File, Save, Selection. And now when I do this, 4 bars piano, it creates a new file called MuseScore, like whatever I just called it. So now if I open that file, and I need to go back to my Cafe folder, there it is, 4 bars piano. And that's all it is. It just has those 4 bars in it. So again, depending on your workflow, Dave does a lot of really interesting things involving creating multiple versions of things, a lot of experimenting as he goes along. So this is a command that he finds useful. I've actually never used it myself, and I will say it's not a very well-known command, as I think you mentioned, Dave, and there's definitely been a distressingly large number of bugs reported in it for the number of people who have used it. So it's like 7 people in the world use it, and each of them has found at least 2 or 3 bugs that they've submitted, kind of thing. That's kind of what it feels like. We fix them all as we find them. So I don't know if there's any known bugs left in this command, but I'm always a little nervous about it. So there's certain things that make me nervous and make me worry are going to corrupt my score. So this is one of them. So definitely, if you save a score this way, immediately load it and check and make sure you got a good score out of it. That's my recommendation when using that command. Don't trust that it did its job correctly. It may have, but experience tells me it's one of the buggier portions of MuseScore. Dave also mentions other not well-known parts of MuseScore that are in the View menu. The piano keyboard is kind of nice. Well, for one thing, it actually will show you what's being played back. And it also shows you what's selected. So if I select a chord, those notes are now highlighted in a kind of a light blue color. During playback, the notes being played are highlighted in a dark blue color. If nothing is selected, and then I hit play, it's easier to follow what's going on. Right? So that's the piano part to MuseScore Café, obviously. So the piano keyboard is useful during playback, but it's also useful during note input. And that's what it was really invented for, so that I can go into note input mode and then start typing some notes. Not typing, but clicking notes. And for whatever reason, MuseScore is not keeping up with me. Am I in playback mode? Huh. Oh, yeah, it looks like I'm in playback mode, and it's just super slow, right? Because I was still messing with that. So unfortunately, there we go. Stop playback. All right, now let's try again. Go to note input mode and click some notes. So you can use the piano keyboard for note input if you find that convenient. The selection filter, I have a whole episode on that, so I'm not going to go into more detail on that. But what I will say about the selection filter, view selection filter, this is it here. It lets you exclude things from a selection. So don't think of it as a way of building selections, because it's not. It's a way of removing things from a selection. So you could select a passage and then say, I want to select everything in this passage except the dynamics, and then copy it somewhere. Or I want to select everything in this except voice 2. Or I want to select everything in this range except the chord symbols, and then copy them somewhere or do whatever. So the selection filter is a way of removing things from a selection. So you've already selected something, like let me add a chord symbol here. selecting and then remove chord symbols from the selection, you'll see that chord symbol is no longer selected. It's black now. So if I hit delete now, the chord symbol will stay behind because it wasn't selected anymore. So selection is great for removing something from a selection. Learning to use it effectively is like a whole subject in itself. And so I do have another cafe episode just dealing with the subjects of selection. So I definitely recommend you go back and check that out if you're useful. Yeah, tempo markings might well be lost. That could well be. That's the kind of thing I would expect to possibly be the case. But anything that's part of that's not attached to the staff itself that you've selected, like tempo markings, rehearsal markings, voltas, things like that, may or may not get saved. I just don't know. And sometimes you might want that, and sometimes you might not. So it's hard to say. It's because everyone who uses that feature probably has a different purpose in mind for it. So the timeline also. I've mentioned about that. The timeline here is a tool that lets you navigate through your score in different ways. Like apparently this score is wow. It shows as having key signature changes every system. That must be that's not really the case. That has something to do with me having added a transposing instrument and then undone it, and it left behind these messed up empty key signature changes. So that shouldn't be the case. But if I go to, say, the MuseScore Café, you can see things like here's where the, and I can also zoom here. I'm using Control and the two-finger swipe to kind of zoom in on this control panel here. And then it lets me see, oh, here's a double bar. Here's a double bar with a repeat. There's the end repeat, right? And there's that. I can also scroll this whole section here and see, actually I want to make it bigger, so I'm going to drag this up, and you can see that here the piano's resting. So if I want to see where do the horns come in after a rest, it's right there. That happens at some point that I always kind of try to time my opening remarks around. So you can kind of see where the instruments play, where they don't play. You can see if there's time signature changes where that happens. And then just by clicking on that thing, it takes you right to that spot in the score. So that's another great navigation tool. There's one other thing that I learned from someone on the forums or somewhere that I want to tell you about. You've probably seen me use this without really talking about what I was doing. So let me show this. I'm going to go back to my selection filter and re-enable chord symbols. If I accidentally enter a note with the wrong duration, like I type a quarter note C, D, and now I want 2/8 notes, and now I want a quarter note D. Oh, but I accidentally forgot to type 5 to change it back to a quarter note. That happens. So if I want to change that to a quarter note, there's commands that are useful. It's the Q and W commands. Q takes whatever you've just entered and shortens it. W lengthens it. So Q will shorten that to a 16th. W then lengthens it back to an 1/8. W again lengthens it to a quarter. Also, let me go back to the 1/8. If I use Shift W, it lengthens it only by a dot, and then again to get to the quarter, and so forth. So Shift Q shortens it again by a lesser amount. So you can actually get through all the different durations by using Shift Q and Shift W. So that's something that I use a lot if I am just talking while I'm doing things and not thinking clearly and enter a note with the wrong duration. Yes, I can just erase it and enter it again, but I use Q and W and Shift Q and Shift W a lot, basically to correct mistakes like that. So let me get that tempo back where it was. So that's a command I use actually quite a bit. So learning how to export to MIDI, yeah, I showed the export thing, and learning to import, well, that's just opening the file. So you just use the regular old file import. So like if I go, here's the MuseScore Café saved as a MIDI file. I just used file open, and now when I open it, I'm going to get a version of the score. So some stuff doesn't come through, right? Because MIDI is not a notation format. It doesn't know all the fancy stuff. But it, a lot of, like, some of the notes are spelt funny. This song is in B flat, and the key signature apparently didn't come through correctly. That's weird. It did on one staff only. I'm not sure why that's the case. But in any case, yeah, some stuff comes through. MIDI is not a great format for dealing with music, but if it's all you got, it's all you got. And so it gives you this bottom panel with a lot of controls to try to fix some of the things that could go wrong. Like if you see notes that are like the duration looks funny, or it's using multiple voices in a funny way, or it's using triplets in a funny way, you can play with the settings in here about how many voices it'll try to use, what kind of tuplets it'll try to use. You can play with these settings and then hit the apply button, and it will try again. Like if I tell it, no, there's no triplets in this thing, I can just go through and just say no triplets. Turn off all triplets. And then, because this thing shouldn't be a triplet, hit apply, and now it reinterprets that same music without the triplet, except it still did the triplet. Sometimes, I guess, if it thinks it has no choice, it'll still do it. Not sure why that's the case, to be honest, but that's just the way it is. So in any case, if you are forced to deal with MIDI import a lot, you can spend some time finding a way around this dialogue and figuring out how to kind of control the process of importing things. Export and import of music XML, same thing. That file export to export, and just open to open things. Definitely, feel free to look around and find where you can find MIDI files. I would definitely recommend not using MIDI files if you can find a music XML file. Music XML will be 100 times better than MIDI. So first look for music XML. If you fail, then you can settle for MIDI. Realistically, if I'm trying to enter a piece of classical music into MuseScore and I can't find a music XML file, I can only find a MIDI, I usually won't bother. It'll be faster for me to just retype the thing. But if I've got a music XML file, yeah, I'll import the thing and then start fixing it up. So just a couple more things here from Dave in here about learning the inspector. And a lot of these have to do with chord symbol playback. The things to know about the inspector: select anything in your score. And let me close the play panel for now. This is where all the settings that have to do with that element are. It'll have all these settings for the font size, etc., whatever's relevant for that thing. This is text. So you can see settings that are relevant for text. If you pick a tempo marking, there'll be settings that are relevant specifically for tempo. Select a dynamic marking, it's settings specifically for dynamics. And in the inspector, most of the settings have these little S buttons next to them. So if I take that one dynamic and make it bigger, and now it's 16-point font, if I then hit the little S button next to it, now all the dynamics are bigger. S is for set as style. I don't know if we think of the S as standing for set or standing as style. Either way, it's S is the button that will take that change you just made and make it the style setting. So if you want to not hear your chord symbols play back, and like on my score, I didn't want them to play back because I've actually written out the chords, written out the voicings and the rhythms there. So I actually turned the chord symbol off. And if I wanted to turn it back on, I would hit the play button and then the set as style. And I also already showed you how in the mixer you can change the playback to use other instruments or be different volumes and so forth. If you're done with your score, Yeah, and this is a good one, Dave. Here, if you're done with your score and it's only one measure long, and you want to get rid of all those empty measures, there's two ways of doing it. One is to select all those measures and then Control Delete. But another way is just to go to Tools, Remove Empty Trailing Measures, and now, boom, the empty measures at the end of your score are just gone. It figures out which measures at the end of the score to get rid of. So yeah, if you created a score with, like we often do, you create a score with more measures than you're going to need, or you add measures more than you're going to need, and then you finish your score and realize there's these empty measures at the end, that remove trailing measures is a great command. So, can you drag a note forward or backwards in time? No, you can't. So you can drag a note, but what that does is changes the spacing. As you can see, when I'm dragging this note, it's changing the spacing. So since MuseScore is a notation program, it's mostly oriented towards doing things that are directly relevant to the notation. If you want to change where a note happens, use cut and paste. So if I want to take that D and move it to another beat, I can cut it from this beat, and then if I want it to be in the next measure, paste it. Or if I want it to be on beat 4, paste it onto beat 4, etc. So cut and paste is how you move things in time, and it works whether it's a single note or whether it's a whole, 3 beats here. Sorry, I meant to do shift. If I want to move this whatever, 2.5 beats, and I want to move it to start there it is now. So cut and paste is how you move things in time, whether you're moving them earlier or later, or moving them up and down, right? Moving them from one instrument to another instrument. Moving notes, cut and paste. Yeah, so as far as MIDI importing, I guess it's going to depend on your editing skills compared to your entry skills. My entry skills are super fast. I can enter music pretty darn quick. Editing is a slower process, looking for mistakes, looking for problems, and then figuring out how to fix them. So if it happens to work out that you can edit it faster than you can enter it, by all means, go for it. But for me, that's almost never the case. So Kenneth Kletke has a question. How do you do that fall gliss combination? Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's a good one. So I'm going to show you exactly how I did that. I'm going to, and it needs to be, I'm going to go to my empty MuseScore Café score over here, and I'm going to enter a high note in the trumpet, and I'll make it a half note by pressing W. And the way I did that fall, there's multiple ways of doing it, but this is one I find effective. I'm going to add a grace note after. So I go to my grace notes palette, which I've rearranged in my own personal workspace, so I always have to go looking for it here. Add one of these grace notes after. And now, and it doesn't do a great job of formatting it, but by the time I put in line breaks and there's more notes present, it'll be fine. So that was probably not a great place for a line break. Let me undo that. Let me just assume there's going to be 4 measures on this line. Yeah, because it doesn't create great spacing for the grace notes after, if the score is really compressed like that was. So I've got my note here, and now I want to take this grace note after and move it down an octave. And now what I want to do is I want to select that entire note. And to be honest, I'm not sure if what I'm about to try is going to work, but I'm going to try drag selecting just the grace note. Yeah, I was afraid of that. It selected kind of the main note too. So what I need to do is select the note head, the stem, and the flag, and then make them invisible by pressing V. Now what I'm going to do is select the high note and go to the Arpeggios and Glissandi palette and make a gliss. And now what I'm going to do is go into the inspector, and I'm going to first turn off the display of the text. Second, I'm going to change from chromatic to portamento. And now I'm going to get something closer. Notice it goes, it played the note again, which I don't want. So I got to select that grace note and turn off play. And now I also want to make it so that it holds the note longer and then drops suddenly. And I talked about these commands last week, I think. It's the ease in command. And I'm just going to crank it up to the max. And now it's going to hold that note a while and then drop quickly. It didn't really do that, did it? That's weird. I would have thought I had... Is it... Maybe it's... I don't remember what I'm doing, to be honest. I thought that was the one, but it doesn't really seem to have sounded any different. Yeah, maybe it's because it's a long note. To be honest, I don't really remember. But anyhow, you play with those commands. That didn't sound different to me. Yeah, I guess it does sound different. Anyhow, that's what you play with. And then what I did is I made that invisible, and then I added the actual fall symbol. The fall symbol looks nice, but it doesn't play back. The gliss to the grace note plays back. It does still have that weird glitch. That's not the grace note playing. That weird glitch you heard is just a glitch in the portamento, because portamento can't really go more than an octave. But when all the other instruments are playing, you never notice it. Anyhow, that's that's pretty much everything in here. And yeah, regroup rhythms is a really good one, and I'm going to show that real quick. And then wrap up that and transpose and wrap up real quick. So regroup rhythms, whoops, I don't want me to be here, is useful for rewriting rhythms that are written incorrectly. So in my, when I was playing around with a score earlier, I did some weird copying and pasting, like this quarter note is in the wrong place. If you know about how notation works, you shouldn't have a quarter note on the end of a beat. But if I select this and now hit Tools, Regroup Rhythms, wow, it didn't fix that. I guess it figures that's okay. Yeah, it's okay if those eighth notes, if those eighth rests were notes, not okay otherwise. So let me move it to somewhere it's definitely not okay. I'm gonna Control X, and now, whoops, let me undo that. Select just the note, Control X, change this to a 16th note, paste my note here, and make it a quarter note again. Now when I do reset, when I do regroup rhythms, boy, it still didn't do it. All right, so I don't want to be lying to you, but it does know how to fix a lot of common mistakes. Let me change this to a half note. This it should know how to fix. Tools, regroup rhythms. There we go. That half note on the and to 1 gets changed to a dotted quarter tied to an eighth. That eighth note is now on beat 3. That helps readability immensely. So regroup rhythms doesn't know everything, but it knows a lot and can definitely improve things if you've created all sorts of weird, hard to read rhythms. And then the last thing on Dave's list was just about transposing the score. Select all, and then Tools, Transpose. You can now pick a new key for it. Or you can transpose by interval and say, hey, I just want to transpose up a major second. Or you can transpose diatonically. Say, I don't actually want to keep all the intervals identical. I just want to transpose it up a third. Sometimes it'll be a major third, sometimes a minor third, but I want to keep it in the key. So transpose diatonically does that. So transpose dialogue will do all your transposing work for you. All right. Some tips. Thanks, Dave, for that exhaustive list of some great tips in there. Thanks, Dan, also for your suggestion. Thanks for the questions that came in. Thanks for the people, Yete and other people who have given me some great advice over the years about the scroll wheel, about scrubbing playback, and about using Q and W to fix mistakes. Those are all some great bits of advice. So, that said, let me undo whatever changes I made to this score here, and from the beginning. Whoa, no, from the beginning. There we go. So, this has been the MuseScore Café, and I hope you've all learned something in here. Next week, my plan is it's the score of the month, and I pick some score and really just focus on that one score. And I've been talking about harp music lately. It's come up a couple times. I think we're going to try to pick a harp score. So if any of you harpists are out there and you want to volunteer a score that you've been working on that you want to see me either critique what you've done with it, or one that you're still working on, you want me to help enter it, or just one that you grab from online that you want to see me enter. Feel free to make some suggestions of a score for me to work on, so I can work on harp stuff. Otherwise, I'll just find something myself that I think works. But by all means, I want to serve you best. And so if you've got a particular one in mind, hit me up, drop it into the community, go to the community and post it to the conversation space. So tomorrow will be the music masterclass. And hopefully a lot of you are working on the challenge that we've been working on. You can get a free 1-year subscription to the Mastering MuseScore School, all my online courses, just by writing a melody to an existing chord progression and maybe arranging it. Competition there. The best one wins this free subscription. Great competition. Go over to the community website and check it out in the challenges space. So thanks everyone for being here, and I will